If you're a qualified accountant who's ever questioned whether you actually want to be an accountant, today's episode of the Variance Analysis may well be for you. This week I'm joined by Gavin Adair, Chief Executive of Rosa's Thai Cafe, a 30-restaurant group and very successful delivery business who began his career as a trainee chartered accountant with Grant Thornton. Gavin, by his own admission, is an accountant who should never have been an accountant, and so has used his qualification to drive his career towards a general business executive role. He and I will discuss how and why the accounting background is an excellent grounding for a CEO, how to take control of your career and drive it in the direction you want, and why career risks are advantageous even if they don't work out. You'll also hear how Gavin led Rosa's Thai through a pandemic, holding on to all staff and actually opening 6 new sites. So Gavin, very modest guy, but quite a set of achievements to talk about. I'll hand it over to you for an introduction. So Gavin, great to see you. Thanks for joining. It'd be really useful for people listening if you could just give a bit of a summary of who you are today and how you got there.
Sure, it's nice to be doing it, Adrian. Nice to be connected again. So I'm currently Chief Exec at Rosa's Thai, which is a small, I like to call group of independent restaurants. So avoiding the chain word. We have 30 restaurants, principally in London, but around the rest of the UK. So the reason for the podcast, I'm an accountant by training. So, trained with Grant Thornton, moved through corporate finance and corporate restructuring with them, and then left whilst I was doing an exec MBA because I didn't want to effectively lock myself in to an accounting firm for my career, which is what it felt like at making that partnership decision point. And from there took a series of financial roles, which culminated in we met when I was at Channel 4, and then from there I moved into F&B. So that was about 10 years ago. My first job in hospitality was as finance director of a bigger restaurant group, and it was from that job that I moved to another restaurant group in general management, which actually probably a very generous description for what I did in that business. But I moved there. And that was the beginning, I guess, that was about 8 or 9 years ago of sort of more commercial roles and general management career path from there.
Okay, I like the reluctance to mention composition restaurant groups by name.
There's no reluctance. I'm very proud of both businesses, and I'm sure we'll get to that. I was out for dinner last night with 3 former colleagues from one of the so far unnamed businesses.
Very good. So you once described yourself to me as an accountant that should never have been an accountant. And that's probably a feeling that lots of people have when they qualify. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
An accountant that should never be an accountant. I'm delighted you picked up on that. To begin with, I didn't intend to study accountancy. So I intended to and hoped to study law. Unfortunately, whilst I was wouldn't say a model student, but I was a relatively committed student until I was about 16 or 17. My predicted A grades in all my A-level subjects became somewhat unattainable when I discovered some combination of wine, women, and song. So I ended up unable to go to study law at any of the universities that I wanted to go to study law at, and but was offered a place to go and study accountancy. And I thought, I'll do that, and I'll change after a year. I'll change to law. I just wanted to get to university and get cracking. And then to cut a long story short, after a year, it seemed a bit like hard work to start again. So I thought, well, I'll continue with accountancy and see where it takes me, and it's taken me all sorts of places.
And so, having studied accountancy at university, you still decided to pursue it by going into an accounting firm.
Well, it doesn't look great on paper for somebody who didn't want to study accountancy. Then not just studies it, but as you say, pursues or starts a training contract, finishes a training contract. But actually, my first job out of university was as a kids entertainer, come lifeguard, come receptionist, come barman at a holiday park in north of Scotland in Tummel Valley. And I had a great time doing that until I realised that everybody else had got themselves jobs, sort of career jobs, for want of a better phrase. and that I'd missed the boat because I hadn't actually applied to what was then, I think it was then called the milk round, when all of the accounting firms came calling. So I applied thinking, well, I actually need to earn some money and not live up in the north of Scotland. It would be quite so much fun in the winter. I think it was just lazy. It seemed the easier, obvious thing to do. And I was convinced, I have to say, to be clear, I was convinced that it would be a great foundation for whatever it was that I was going on to do. And at the time, all I knew was I didn't think I wanted to do that, but I didn't actually know what I wanted to do.
I think that's quite a common theme in the candidates that we meet, particularly at the newly qual level. They've gone to university, they want to get a professional qualification post-university, and they feel like an accounting qualification will be a springboard to lots of different directions. Did you always think that you would use it to go into a general business role, or did you think that you would go through a more traditional accounting route?
It's genuinely so long ago that I'm not sure I can distinctly remember, because I don't remember ever thinking I would like to run a business. But I do remember thinking I can't see myself working as an accountant for the rest of my years. I think I was just one of those classic people you just described who didn't really know what they wanted to do, knew that they had been lucky to end up where they ended up, and should be pursuing some sort of a professional career. Even that word doesn't sound, neither of those words sounds quite right, but you're smiling at me. But so it, very middle class upbringing, very fortunate to be in that position. And I wasn't going to be a doctor like my father. I wasn't going to be a lawyer like my uncle. And didn't really have any. Actually, I did have an uncle who was an accountant, so I can blame him, or thank him, as we'll ultimately get to, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. So you joined Grant Thornton in an audit role initially?
Yes.
And how long did you spend in audit?
So not quite to the end of, not quite until I passed my ACA, so probably 2.5 years, and then I transferred into the corporate recovery. This was in the West Yorkshire office. I joined the West Yorkshire office of Grant Thornton, having been to Leeds and thinking Leeds looked like a great city to work and live in, only to realise on a week before I started that I hadn't read the fine print, and that I was actually going to be working in the Bradford office of the West Yorkshire office, which actually wasn't where I thought I was going to be. So I had a brief period in Bradford, and then actually worked across the region, but worked out of Leeds for the rest of that period. Yeah.
And one would assume that the move into corporate finance is actually quite a competitive field, right? Because lots of people that are in the audit practice would like to get across into there. Were there things that you can pinpoint that you did that got you access to that, or is there advice you can give people in the audit practice as to how they can maneuver themselves into those roles?
So I actually moved into corporate recovery, although the two were, I can't remember the name of the phrase, specialist financial services or something like that. They sort of sat side by side. And then I moved into corporate finance later when I moved to New York. But looking back on it, I'm sure I could talk about all sorts of things that I did. I'm not sure I was terribly conscious at that time of what I was doing, but what I was doing, and people said to me for many years in my career, you're a fantastic networker. And I actually don't think I was a very good networker. I just enjoyed people's company. So I enjoyed talking to people. I was very comfortable talking to people, and whatever their job, whatever client, any member of our firm from any business, and it almost didn't register to me whether I was dealing with a managing partner or I was dealing with a junior at a client, if the conversation was interesting, then we typically would have an interesting conversation. That sounds very Irish, but you know, and I think the opportunities came from that. So if I was to try to retrofit the advice, it would be to embrace the breadth of people that you're coming across, and to be curious and interested in them and open-minded about where things would go. Because I think ultimately all of the things that happen career-wise, certainly in my, if I call it my financial part of my career, or my time in finance, typically were because I didn't quite fit the often correct stereotype of somebody who should be doing those jobs. And I think therefore I just probably slightly stood out and managed to make that in a good way rather than in a bad way.
And so I think you alluded to earlier that you were on the partnership track, and how long were you in Grant Thornton for?
Well, in the end, about 9 years, 8 or 9 years. So when I started, they actually had something at the time called fast track to partnership. So and so I think, from memory, I don't think everybody who joined on a training contract actually joined on that program. But I was fortunate enough that I did, and actually, to be fair, that was one of, you typically also on that program would probably get first opportunities at some of the things that came along. Coming back to your earlier question, yeah. But ultimately, when I left to spend my time overseas, I kind of came off that program in a sense, because I didn't go on a traditional secondment. I went on an open-ended move that Grant Thornton facilitated in terms of the first move where I needed a visa. So it wasn't one of the more typical go there for a year or 2 years and come back and it's part of your tick the box of things you've done if you're going to become a partner. It was slightly different to that.
Okay. And so at the point at which you went to New York, were you still thinking that partnership might appeal to you, or had you made your mind up at that point that you were probably going to do a period of time and then move on to something new?
Yeah, interestingly, that at that point I wasn't thinking I want to get out of the industry, get out of accountancy. No, absolutely not. Although I distinctly remember a conversation with the then managing partner of the office, who approached me and took me out for lunch and said, I think you're going to leave. And I said, why do you think that? And he said, I think you're going to go and work for, I think it was Anderson's at the time, or I can't remember whether they were Arthur Anderson or Anderson's. I said, no, I'm definitely not going to do that. And he said, all right, okay. So, but I might leave. And he said, why? I said, I want to do something else, but I don't know what it is. I think I'd quite like to go and work overseas, not to go and work for somebody else locally. And he said, but why don't you do it with us? And I said, because I don't, as I've just explained a minute ago, I said, because I don't want to do a traditional go there, come back. And he said, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, given you ask, I'd quite like to go to the States, Hong Kong, and maybe South Africa. I said, well, why can't you do that with us? And I said, that'd be great. If I could do that with you, that'd be fantastic. And that's actually, and ultimately, that's what Grant Thornton facilitated for me. They said, well, we'll make the introductions, but you probably need to go to the States first, because you need a sponsor visa to go there, as you well know with your business. And then from there, through the International Business Center network, we can make other introductions as we go. So again, I mean, that coming back to your earlier question, that was a little bit of having a relationship. It was a little bit because they could see I was networking and networked, and it was a little bit of just having the confidence to be open about what you wanted to do and not worry about what happens if I say I want to do this and they say, well, you don't fit with us anymore. It's like, well, at that point 20 odd years ago, I just had that confidence. I hope it was confidence, not arrogance at the time, that it didn't matter. didn't worry about it, and it worked out fantastically well.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because lots of people in that situation would panic and say, no, I'm not going to leave. No, I love it here, and not take the opportunity to actually be open and honest about what they want from their career and see what they can get from their manager.
I think that's true, and I think it's, I think people are too worried about the downside and or don't have enough trust in a relationship to say. We see it in my own business today. I'm spending a lot of time trying to build environments where people will tell you probably what they think you don't want to hear. And I spend a lot of time telling people, if you don't tell me something that you think is going to be difficult or cause me a problem, there's actually something in Thai culture which is exactly to that point. Spend a lot of time explaining to them that it will put me in an even worse position if I don't know.
Yeah.
If we don't know, so what is the worst that can happen if you are open and honest about where you want to go? Doesn't work all the time, but it's worked for me, I think.
I think it's a really good point, and I've over the years regularly asked candidates when we're talking to them about their reason for leaving their current job, and most people have thought about it for a long time, and they've agonized over it because changing jobs is stressful, but they'll give you a reason, and I tend to follow it up with that's really interesting. What have you done to try and change that? And quite often there isn't an answer. They've got this dissatisfaction, but they haven't approached anybody about it. They haven't tried to change it internally. And a lot of people don't realize that if you're working for a good boss, they are as invested in your career as you are, or almost as invested in your career as you are. And if you have that open dialogue with them, very often you can change the things that are dissatisfactory.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah.
No, but it cuts both ways. So on the thankfully rare occasions in my career when somebody has resigned, the ones that still hurt are the ones where I didn't see it coming, because I feel a responsibility that I should have known that, and I feel a responsibility, or rightly or wrongly, that I haven't created that environment I was talking about a minute ago, where somebody has felt that they've been able to tell me. Because so ultimately, I think, but not everybody, not every boss, manager, whatever phrase we want to use, is actually like that. But again, as an individual in that situation, what have you got to lose by saying? Because if you're getting to the point, or you're at risk of getting to the point where you're going to leave, then why not have the conversation? Because what harm can it do?
Yeah, I agree. That's good advice. So from Grant Thornton, you went straight to Channel 4 after that?
So I was in working out of New York. So I think, again, I don't know, maybe a story similar to the one I told them about how I ended up there in the first place. I moved to New York in corporate finance. I got promoted within about 6 months. And after about 8 months, it might have been a celebratory event, which was in Disneyland. I think all the new managers or senior managers, whatever it is, senior manager, whatever it was, were all at a Grant Thornton event hosted in Disneyland. And the national managing partner of the United States, or national managing partner or national audit partner, had a cup of coffee with me, because he also looked after the corporate finance team. So I'd met him a couple of times. So we had a 15-minute cup of coffee, and he said, congratulations. How are you feeling about things? I said, well, to be honest, it doesn't feel that exciting anymore. This was after about 6 or 8 months. He said, what do you mean? I said, I'd like to do something a bit, broader, and maybe some international travel. And he said, oh, okay. So we're looking for an international corporate finance manager to replace a chap out of the UK who's finishing in 3 months, and it would involve some client work, some internal training, and traveling to other countries and helping them prepare for this, or meeting clients who might want to list, and advising other businesses. Would you be interested in that? I said you might be able to twist my arm. So I got fantastic year out of that, which culminated in me. What made me think of it was it culminated in me being at the International Partners Conference in Cannes, south of France, for those who can't understand my Irish accent. and on September the 11th, 2001. So my now wife, who had transferred out to New York with PwC, she worked for at the time, she was supposed to be flying out that day. So she got locked down while we were there. And I had, we'd just shook hands on a job to go to Hong Kong to help set up a corporate finance practice, a regional corporate finance practice in Hong Kong. I think literally on that day. And then it's a long answer to your question, but my wife couldn't come out. I got back to New York. It was obviously a really eerie place at the time. I was just thinking, I can't go to Hong Kong to try in these markets to try to help set up a business. It was just so much uncertainty. So I came back with Grant Thornton and was offered jobs in corporate finance or corporate restructuring in London. And it was from there, after a couple of years skipping forwards, that I was sponsored to do the exec MBA, but realized 3 months into that the reason I was doing that and not insolvency exams, which was the traditional route, or the reason I'd been doing all of these non-traditional things, was because actually back to where we started, I should never actually have been in that role in the first place.
Do you find, working on a variety of transactions through the corporate finance times, that must be hugely valuable for everything that you've done subsequently?
I'm sure it is, but I think just not even specifically that, but just the variety of roles. I mean, one of the great things about Grant Thornton, I am, I'm biased, but I am a big fan in that you get exposed to so many things so quickly, and actually, the typical audit is much shorter than many of the audits that some of the big, whatever they are now, big four now, firms we involved with, and I was obviously with peers from other firms and could see how quickly I was getting exposed to different things and different people. To your specific point, I can't remember much of what we did in those specific transactions or public things in the States or any of the listing rules or anything else, but I'm just super comfortable with everything from valuations to incentive schemes to anything else, because A, I've been exposed to them in some way, shape or form, and B, I've got that natural confidence that comes from knowing that almost nobody in the room understands everything technical anyway. So, if you don't understand, just keep asking until you do understand, or find somebody else who's working with you or for you who can understand. And I don't know if that quite answers your question or not, but I think it's the combination or culmination of all the different experiences that just then leave you pretty relaxed about whatever you're going to face. I don't know what I'm going to face later today, but that's part of the charm and challenge of doing the job I'm doing now.
And when you left, then, did you have a grand plan, or was it, I want to do something different, this move quite appeals to me, let's do this one and see where it goes?
So the irony is not lost on me that so the grand plan was I want to do, not advise.
Right.
So I'm doing, not advising, and so I rewrote my check to Grant Thornton, who had kindly sponsored me to do the exec MBA. So I rewrote that check. I wrote the check, paid them back the money, but continued with the exec MBA course, and started advising as an independent consultant. Started advising people in my program who had businesses, and they're like, "Could you come and look at this for me, or could you come and do this for me?" That, again, networking, that led to a guy on that program introducing me to a chap who'd recently been parachuted into a retail business who was looking for an interim finance director. And great story there about if I say so myself, about how I met him and when I met him, but which you can ask me about if you'd like to. But anyway, 6 months with him, fantastic experience, and I also met where we met, as you said, Channel 4. You said earlier I met the group CFO at Channel 4 when I did some pro bono work for the Opera House, and so she called me one day and said, "Could you come and help us with a bit of consulting?" So I was still an advisor, but it was all. It definitely wasn't a grand plan. But it was a range of experiences, and I guess at that point it was not consulting. In that sense, it was more finance experience, finance roles, the sort of reality of a line finance job. So at this point, I still haven't escaped as in the way that I think about it.
So at what point did you escape?
At what point did I escape? I mean, that would have been that was the decision to leave Ask Italian, which was then part of Gondola Group, big restaurant group at the time, where I'd been finance director for about 3 years, and I kind of it was a bit of a turnaround. I think that's why they in the end how I got the job in the first place. And from about 18 months into that, in fact, I remember meeting Harvey Smythe, who was the group chief executive at the time, and he was the sort of sixth or seventh and final stage interview for the job. And he said to me, this will make him. He wasn't this kind of a guy, but he said, why do you want to be finance director? And I said, and I'd done 6 interviews or psychometric assessments and things. So he said, why do you want to be a finance director? And I said, I don't want to be a finance director. And he said, okay. Well, I said, I want to work in general management ultimately, but this job appeals for these reasons, and this is why I think we're talking. And looked at him, and he said, well, that's good to hear, because your psychometric profile says you shouldn't be a finance director. It says you should be a general manager. But I'm not looking for a general manager at the moment. I'm looking for a finance director. So why don't you come and be the finance director, and then we'll see what happens. So he and I, so again, a bit like the conversation back in the day, the Grant Thornton conversation. I was just, this is who I am, because if they didn't like that, then it wouldn't have been a good fit anyway. And so we did, as the group was breaking up, when Pizza Express was sold or when Byron was sold, we were looking at, was there something to do? And we talked about a few different things, but in the end, there wasn't really anything interesting or suitable. So he helped, and others helped with introductions to other people in the industry. And I probably cut the cord and went to Oaxaca with no job title, no idea what I was going to be doing to help launch some spin-off businesses for them. So that was the definitely not. The phrase that came to mind was the moment of no return. It definitely wasn't like that, because I think once you've got your financial training, it's always there.
Yeah.
But that was the moment, big salary cut, which was, compared to what I would have been earning in Grant Thornton, I was already by a comparable point earning a pittance, but in reality very well paid, but a big pay cut, and sort of start again. No exec assistant, no team to work with you, but try and put it all together. And that was I guess that was probably the defining moment. That makes it sound wrong, but that was I'm really serious about this.
I think you raised an interesting point about always having the financial qualification, the financial experience to fall back on, because I had that conversation with a lawyer friend of mine recently who's taking a similar risk. And it's like, well, if it doesn't work out, you don't go back to the beginning, you go back to where you were today, because you've still got that 10-year career history. And I think that's one of the great things that we try and get candidates to realize is you can take a risk in your career. And actually, if you take a risk and it doesn't work out, most employers won't frown upon that. They'll understand that, and they'll look at all the stuff that went before.
I'd say I'd agree with that, but I'd also say there's more than a minority of employers who would actually look at it as a positive.
Yeah.
And look at somebody who hadn't taken that risk and say, I know, I can definitely speak for myself. Can't I? I mean, if you're looking for somebody who's going to be able to deal with uncertainty, challenge, change, all those sorts of things, it doesn't, this again doesn't sit easily with not just the stereotype, but with the training. You don't want people who understand risk, but you don't. I believe you don't want people in your team who are really risk averse or have a real fear of failure, because and if you do, then there are certain careers for you. If you don't, then it's almost self-selecting. right? Because the people who will make the transitions are the people who won't get locked in. The other thing, the longer you stay in a role, it's no surprise that your whole lifestyle builds around that. So particularly financially, I think it becomes harder and harder. And I know some great guys, friends of friends, who have talked to me about making a change in the last 5 years, and they never can because they cannot. I think I just about was able to do it. Very, very supportive wife, understanding wife, but and kids at the right age. But once you get to a certain point, and you've got the mortgage, you've got the house, you've got whatever, you then can't take the same risk, or you don't feel you can because of particularly the financial implications. I think I would hate to have found myself in that position.
Yeah, golden handcuffs, not a comfortable thing at all. So tell me about Oaxaca. What businesses were you launching? What was it that you were doing for them?
Oaxaca's a fantastic business. I was there for 4 years. So I met Mark, one of the two founders, for a cup of coffee. Not long after he'd had twins, and I think he was just exhausted because I'd had twins 3 years before, and I think he was exhausted, and I think he looked at me as somebody who survived having twins, and he wanted to he had an idea for a new business, which ultimately it was a burrito business called Burrito Mama. So he'd had this idea for this business, and he was a fantastic guy, loads of ideas, and talked about what else the business could do. And he didn't have at the time he didn't think he had enough resource to sort of focus on launching that. So I came in to sort of help develop and execute that idea, I guess, from close to scratch. And then also there's another business called, we launched it as DF Mexico. It's now called DF Tacos. 3 sites now. So I developed and launched that business too. And the idea was that after we got them both launched, then I effectively became managing director of those new businesses. So I described myself to people as a multi-site, multi-brand operator. We had one of each, but it sort of sounded very, very, very pithy way to describe what I did. But great fun, unbelievably hard work, like unbelievably hard work. 90 hours a week, every week for months, no holidays for 2 years as a family. Had a 1-day trip to France on my wife's birthday when we had people out staying with us in France. And I was in drains, unblocking drains and all sorts of things on press night. Just the experience can't measure the experience, but I realized I was 40 and change. And our kids were 8, I think, and the twins were 5. And I just thought, I can't not go on holiday with my kids. I can't do this for X amount of time. So I agreed a different job, a commercial and strategy director job across the group with them, and that was great, fantastic. So I was sad to leave, but tapped on the shoulder to go and actually run a restaurant business, and that was too good an opportunity to turn down.
So tell us about Rosa's Thai, because I know you guys had an interesting and pretty successful journey through the pandemic, which I think would be interesting to people who are in hospitality.
What was the phrase you just used? An interesting and pretty successful.
Yeah, as you described it to me the other day, I think it sounded like you'd bucked the trend in hospitality, I think, through the pandemic.
Yeah, I don't know how we characterize it. We were very lucky. I mean, we incredibly lucky. We had a delivery business already. So out of our existing restaurant estate, we had a delivery business that was reasonably well established in most of the sites. So at the point at which everything began closing down for eat-in, and all around us, people were actually saying you're closing completely, just going into shutdown period. I was very fortunate that at the very last minute, I was asking the teams how they felt about which way to go, because it was very, it was not a knife edge which way to go with that decision, and the team said, look, we want to continue working. So we kept more than half of our estate open for delivery, and yeah, that proved to be hugely successful. It was a nightmare, but it was nowhere near as much of a nightmare for us as it was for businesses who couldn't trade, bars, nightclubs, theaters, or restaurants who didn't have a delivery business and or had made lots of people redundant. So we were really fortunate. We've opened restaurants. We've opened 5 new restaurants over the last 12 months, or through that period, 6 actually. Another one opened last week. So we opened 6 restaurants in the last 15 months, and we opened a number of delivery-only kitchens as well. And we were able to, with great support from landlords, other suppliers, partners. But I think we were a good citizen too. So it could have been a lot worse. It was not fun, but it could have been a lot worse.
And when you say you were a good citizen, what do you mean?
I mean that so at that point in time, because we didn't know that keeping the restaurants open was going to generate cash. We were going to actually end up cash positive from continuing with the delivery business. But we made a conscious decision straight away not to hold on to cash. So we paid suppliers, and often we paid them early. We paid rent to pretty much all of our. We went to our landlords and said, like everybody else, can you help us? And we got a range of answers, but a lot of our landlords were independent developers or individuals. And so, in some cases, we just rescheduled how we would pay in arrears rather than in advance, but we paid. So we made sure that we paid our rent where we could. We didn't make anybody redundant. We paid our teams additional money so they didn't need to travel on public transport, because nobody knew at that point whether it was safe or it wasn't safe. It made them feel comfortable. We supported furlough for people who joined after the event and weren't entitled to furlough. We paid them the equivalent amounts anyway. So, there's probably always more that you could do, but I think we tried to, and we supported initiatives like the Feed the NHS. So I think we've now given something like 30,000 free meals to hospitals and across the piece from a ground up local manager saying, I'd like to help my local hospital, sort of then turned into talking with our delivery partner Deliveroo and talking with other partners to make that a more sort of national campaign or national opportunity. Just got this long answer. Good citizens, just trying to do the right thing in a period of uncertainty. And I'm sure there'll be, well, I don't know whether the people watching this will have gone through these same experiences or not. But I'm just really conscious that I'm sure people could point at all the things we didn't do and all the other things we could have done, but we did the best we could.
I think we were all feeling our way, weren't we? I mean, we were similar. We didn't make any redundancies. We introduced new wellness initiatives to keep people in a good place while they were at home, either on furlough or working from home. We used the furlough scheme, but we used it sparingly, and we brought people back as quickly as we could. And you just try and do the bits that you can. And I think that what we've seen out the back of that is a lot of payback, because people feel like they were treated well, people feel like they were looked after, and they've come in and been really enthusiastic about coming back to work because they recognise that we went the extra mile and did everything we could. Similarly, I'm sure there were things that we could have done that we didn't think of, or that other companies did that we didn't do. But I think we just did our level best to look after everybody.
Well, it was a great moment. I mean, our industry is actually pretty supportive in general anyway, but people really did come together to offer advice, practical help, share information, to lobby together for things, to partner on those things like the NHS. And I think I'm a big one. When I chatted last week, I'm a big one for perspective. I think it's hard to say that it's been a good period for the business. I mean, it hasn't. It's been incredibly challenging. It's been incredibly challenging for individuals. We're just so grateful that we haven't lost anybody through it all. But people's families have been affected. People's livelihoods have been affected within our business. Never mind elsewhere. So, but the perspective of what it could have been like, trying to have that perspective of be grateful for what you have and just deal with what's in front of you is hugely helpful.
Do you think as a CEO from a finance background, you were better equipped to deal with some of that uncertainty and risk than perhaps someone that's come through a commercial or operations route?
Some of the structures, some of the discipline, the ability to deal with complexity and uncertainty definitely came from that. Where I actually had the biggest advantage, I think, was that I was at Oaxaca when Oaxaca was had its totally blameless incident with norovirus, and the sort of crisis management element of that, and what we put in place. I was responsible from coordinating that response, and many of the areas that ultimately were challenging at that time. So yeah, that it was that experience as much as the financial background, I think, that helped. But undoubtedly it helped.
And there does seem to have been a move to more CEOs coming from a finance route than there were previously. I think I read 51% of FTSE 100 CEOs are from finance backgrounds rather than sales, commercial, or operations. What do you think is causing that, or why do you think that's happening?
In our business, I think operations is so important. I mean, ultimately, and it's interesting because you see quite a lot of people in managing director positions as opposed to chief executive positions. And I think maybe in our industry more than any other, you can see the distinction. I think the chief executive's role is more about stakeholder management and building teams and strategy and some of the things we've already talked about, dealing with uncertainty and managing risk in such a way that you take advantage of opportunities rather than get paralyzed by fear of all the things that could go wrong. So I think, we talked a minute ago, I think you get discipline, you get exposure to a wide range of things. You can cope with data, analytics, analysis, and you're comfortable with what messages you're getting in financial data as well as in soft data. So why are more people? Is that looking at it from the other way? Is it people just looking at it and feeling there's the qualification is meaningful? There's clearly intellect, there's clearly discipline, there's clearly commitment, and all those other elements, and that works, or looking at it from a business perspective, as I just did to begin with. I don't know. Why do you think?
I think it's an evolution of the move from finance being a purely back office function delivering numbers to finance being a fully business partnering function, which is what we see almost universally in our clients now. And that's, I've been in finance recruitment for 15, 16 years, and that's probably started 14, 15 years ago in my experience, and has developed from there. And I think it's an evolution of that, that having had a seat at the table for so long and been truly influential in strategy and planning and tactics and providing that intelligence, it is a natural evolution that some of those people will start to move forward into actually running the businesses that they've been advising and helping direct. I also think that it probably started to accelerate more as we came out of the financial crisis. There's nothing like a global financial crisis to accelerate the seat of a finance person. So I think there's probably a bit of that in it as well.
I'm sure that's right. But as you were talking, I was thinking, the other thing is, back when we started this conversation, I do think that in training and in their early careers, accountants today are developing a slightly broader skill set. So all the things that, actually, when push comes to shove, running my business, all the technical, commercial elements of what I've learned along the way are actually subconscious. What's really driving our business are all of those, it's actually emotional. I hate the phrase, but it is emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And genuine empathy for, interest in, and ability to deal with people, right? Because that's what it is. It's and then reading and then you're into sort of what you deal with, when you deal with it, prioritization, all that. But so a more rounded individual, and I think that has been happening as people have come out of training, or as you described, through their careers. Then they're naturally going to be able to gravitate in towards those positions, rather than have the accountant of a generation ago who potentially a little bit more sit in their office and do this, because that doesn't work long term. That doesn't work.
So look, I'm conscious we've used up our time. I'd always like to end to give you an opportunity to just advise the people coming out of there, or just having qualified or early on in their career, that want to end up in a general business role. What would you say to them?
I'd say be lucky, but make your own luck.
Right.
So by which I mean, don't be afraid of finding that opportunity, taking that risk, exploring it. It actually might not be for you, because we talked about earlier on, if you don't try it, you won't know. And if you leave it too late, you won't do it. So you've got, and I'd say to people who've got really, really transferable skills, wrap them within a veneer of soft skills, and you should be able to build a career in general management very comfortably.
Great advice. Look, Gavin, really enjoyed it. Appreciate the time you've taken. I think there's some really, really useful points there for people over the course of the conversation.
I look forward to seeing the edit to see how we get that out there.
I don't think there'll be an edit. I think it's been smooth. I think it will just run through.
One take. Very nice to talk to you.
No, really appreciate it, Gavin.
Look forward to that beer or lime and soda in Wimbledon as and when.
Absolutely. Cheers.
Cheers, Adrian. All the best.